This country, under this APC regime, came to become the poverty capital of the world. It became the place where the minimum wage became the miserable wage for workers.
But if you think about Nigeria itself, it's an open prison.
It has actually led them to taking some measures, but we are not interested in any of those measures because they do not address fundamentally the issues that the protesters raised when it started.
Can Nigeria beat bad governance? Weeks of protests against an ever-rising cost of living and corruption saw Nigerians unite to fight for a better life. But after crackdowns and curfews, will their determination force any real change and stop more people from sinking into poverty? I'm Andreas Henke, and today's newsmaker is Nigeria. It started over high living costs and cuts to fuel subsidies. But as many protests do, it morphed into something much greater. The hashtag End Bad Governance became a rallying cry for thousands of Nigerians demanding an end to government corruption, which they say is driving them further into poverty. But some ministers argue the protests were not about real grievances and instead were an attempt to take down an elected government. That, of course, merited a crackdown, which eventually left more than 22 people dead. If there is a silver lining, though, many say the August protests marked a rarely seen unity among Nigerians of different religions, political and ethnic backgrounds, coming together to fight for their greater good. Here's a look.
Nigerians fed up with corruption, hunger, and economic hardships took to the streets. Thousands marched around the country to end bad governance in a 10-day protest. The oil-rich country has experienced one of the worst cost of living crises on the planet. Inflation reached a nearly 3-decade high of 34% in June. 40% of Africa's most populous nation lives below the poverty line. The climate crisis and terrorist insurgency in the country's northeast are also fueling food insecurity. While the ordinary people are struggling, many Nigerian politicians earn huge salaries. That helped push Nigerians, some long divided by religious and ethnic lines, to unite in protest.
We are tired of being hungry. We cannot even feed our children. One tuber of yam is 5,000. We cannot buy tomato and pepper. Pepper is 1,000. The poor cannot survive. Please, we need you to change the government.
Nothing is actually working in Nigeria anymore. Even as an health worker, I can't fend for my family very well. I can't provide most of the basic needs of my family. Not because I am not hardworking, but because the economy is so bad.
Authorities responded with force to the protests. Police fired tear gas to disperse the crowd, and curfews were ordered in several states. Amnesty International says at least 22 people were killed and over 1,000 arrested. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu called for an end to the protests, but said he heard the grievances.
I understand the pain and the frustration that drive these protests, and I want to assure you that our government is committed to listening and addressing the concerns of our citizens. But we must not let violence and destruction tear our nation apart.
Since taking office last year, Tinubu promised to revive the economy and has taken drastic measures. He removed decades-long fuel subsidies and ended controls over currency exchange rates. The IMF and foreign investors have praised the government's reforms, but they've taken a heavy toll on the public. Yet amid the police crackdown and violence, protesters have slowly left the streets.
By and large, it has been a success. We have made our demands known. We have made our grievances known. Though none of our demands have been met, but of course the struggle will continue and we will not stop until we achieve victory.
Some protesters also called on the army to take power, and authorities arrested around 40 people for waving the Russian flag during the protests, saying it was a treasonable offense. Some officials have also said the protests aim to topple the government. Ahead of the protests, the Secret Service said it found funding lines, sponsors, and collaborators of a plot for regime change. But that didn't happen. Tinubu is still in office and facing a united call to end hunger.
So has Nigeria gained a sense of unity unseen before, even if their protests haven't led to any real policy change? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Jos, the General Secretary at the Initiative for a Better and Brighter Nigeria, Tony Young-Godswill. From London, Chairperson of the ruling All Progressives Congress UK chapter, Tunde Doherty. And from the U.S., 2023 Nigerian presidential candidate for the African Action Congress, Omoyele Sowore. Thanks all so much for being with me. Omoyele, I'll begin with you because you seem to have the most history with protests in Nigeria. Things, as we know, have calmed down a bit now, but many are saying there really is a lasting impact to these protests, even if fuel subsidies are still cut and the cost of living still remains high. Do you think that's true?
Yes, it is very correct that these protests has done a lot of things to the psyche of the Nigerian leadership. It has actually led them to taking some measures, but we are not interested in any of those measures because they do not address fundamentally the issues that the protesters raised when it started, and now that we're planning the second one. But I must tell you that, just like you mentioned, the fact that Nigerians, for once, and this has happened probably one of the first times I saw it in my lifetime, that Nigerians across the country and beyond are all united in ending bad governance is something that's very encouraging. And to see that regardless of what was done to suppress these killings, detentions, abuse, torture, that Nigerians have decided that they will persist for 10 days across the country, protesting nonstop, and are now planning for another round is something that is quite encouraging. And I also can reveal to you that the government is on its toes. For those 10 days, they're on their toes, and they remain on their toes. But we haven't achieved exactly what we wanted, and we will not stop until we get those resolved.
Okay, let me ask Tunde if you think that's true. Is the government now on its toes? Have these protests affected the psyche of the leadership in Abuja?
Thank you very much. What Yele is saying, well, he has the right to his own views about the government psyche or not. But I can tell you that the government has always been proactive to the yearnings of Nigerians, and the government is barely 15 months old. And since the inauguration of the president, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, a lot of initiative has been put in place, despite the fact that the removal of the subsidy had seen tremendous economic hardship in the nation. But be it as it may, there are lots of things that the government has initiated to push in this effect. Omoyele would agree with he himself has decided when he was campaigning as presidential candidate, said he's going to remove subsidy. So therefore, there's nothing that the government or the president has done that is not the wish of any of the presidential candidate that came up in 2023. So therefore, what the government has put in place to push in this effect is very, very enduring. It's very, very prosperous initiative. The government initiative has always been to make Nigeria a prosperous nation. If you look at it, ever before in Nigeria, you have had a student loan becoming a law, and students can now get loan to sponsor their education, their tertiary education, which is very promising to the which is an added advantage to students and encouraging students to go to school, reducing the burdens of financial burden from their parents. We also look at
but before you go too far, first of all, Omoyele, I'm sorry, the audience couldn't see your response when you were accused of also pushing for a cut to the subsidies. You definitely disagree with that. But I want to go to Tony now, because Tony, you have been on the ground for all of this. You feel you are speaking on behalf of the people, and you've said this was genuinely about the people. No one was trying to overthrow the government. There was no kind of outside political interference. So let me ask you, first of all, why are certain ministers trying to say that this wasn't genuinely about a people's movement, that there were other forces that were playing a nefarious role in your protests?
Okay, thank you so much for this. You see, one of the problems that we have in Nigeria, one of the problems that we have seen over the years in Nigeria is the fact that our leaders try to politicize everything that happens in our country. You know, look at the protest that is happening, and you get to hear some of the leaders trying to blame this particular politician for being the brain behind the protest, and that other politician or a political party for instigating the protest. Look, this is not true. The real instigation of this protest that we have seen, and we may yet even see more, is the hunger that is in the land. It is the insecurity that is in the land. It is the lack of employment that is in the land. Today, Nigeria boasts of one of the highest number of youths. Over 60% of Nigerians are below the ages of 25. Now, this should have played out positively in our economic situation, but we see that most of our youths are unemployed. Most of our youths are uneducated. Now, somebody just mentioned here, talking about the student loan. Now, how can you be talking about the student loan where education is practically inaccessible to people? Now, you're talking about a student loan for somebody who cannot afford to pay his school fees. Now, assuming that this individual gets the student loan, goes through his education and graduates. Now, don't forget that we already have people who have graduated from school, and up till now, they don't have jobs. So how is this student who couldn't even afford his tuition and now went further to get a student loan, how is he supposed to pay back that loan? Because nobody is talking about the payback. And they said it's a loan, it's not a grant. So it's not about a political party instigating the protest or any politician. It is the hunger that is in the land. Nigerians are hungry. Nigerians don't feel safe in their land. These are the motivating factors of the protests that we see all over Nigeria today.
And Tony, I mean, yeah, you say people are hungry, and you've mentioned the student loans issue. Talk just quickly about how bad other conditions are for average Nigerians right now. I mean, when we talk about the cut in the fuel subsidy, this is not a minor issue for the vast majority of Nigerians. If they can't afford fuel, they can't afford to do their businesses, they can't afford to run their households.
You're right. You're right. It's so bad. And like I say, when I speak, I believe I'm speaking for every Nigerian out there. I believe I'm speaking for the lowest of the lowest Nigerian out there. It is so bad right now that people who could even afford to eat twice a day are struggling to eat just once a day. And that is because of the high cost of living. And it's so terrible that even in this condition where people are struggling to feed even once a day, you get to see on the news that the president has gotten a new vehicle. You see on the news that they've gotten a new yacht. You see humongous spending of funds that we claim are not available to give Nigerians a better today and a hope for tomorrow.
Okay.
So it's so bad. It's really, really bad. People who have small businesses can't even run their businesses because the cost of fuel is so high.
Yeah.
It is terrible. It is terrible.
I have to come back to Omoyele for a second, because actually Tony brought up something that, back in November didn't just make headlines in Nigeria, it actually made headlines in major international news organizations about the discovery that the Nigerian government had approved budgets for a new fleet of SUVs for top officials, for a yacht for the president that had arrived but hadn't quite even been paid for yet because that money was barely there in the first place. How much is this still accumulating? with the people that are taking to the streets now and asking for this end to bad governance?
Well, let me correct on your show that I never advocated for removal of subsidies. I, in fact,
Okay, yeah, I mentioned that, yeah.
Yes, that said we can't remove subsidies because that's a lifeline for the majority of our poor people. When you talk about the cost of governance in Nigeria, you know it globally. Nigerian lawmakers, officials are the highest paid in the world, but Nigerian workers are the lowest paid in the world. So why these guys in government advocate for maximum wages for themselves? They ask for minimum wage, and the wage of an average worker in Nigeria is less than $30 a month. I know of students here in the US who make $30 an hour. So how do you survive on that? And you talk about the president, just last night, and you can track this, a jet was delivered to the president. It cost over $150 million. They bought it for $100 million from a German bank and upgraded it with all kinds of gadgets, including medical equipment, I heard, for another $50 million. It was delivered last night. The vice president's building was just rebuilt with another 21 billion naira. And the president bought the yacht. He renovated an old army barrack called Dodan Barrack, where dictators used to live, just for a place to sleep overnight for another 4 billion naira. And they have been stealing. Corruption has been a major problem with Nigeria. All these are documented. And anything you're hearing from him, by the way, came from proper investigations, because I was an investigative journalist before I got involved in partisan politics. So the Nigerian people who bear the brunt of this mismanagement across board are laboring under the yoke of irresponsible and expensive governance. That is why 15 demands we put out there go to the core of how to reduce the cost of governance and to cut corruption and to ensure that they demilitarize the country. Their response, as usual, is to go out there and kill more people, jail more people, harass, and ensure that Nigerians do not enjoy any good thing from their resources in the country. Whereas the few minority of the people in leadership, less than 1% of the country, live lavishly.
Right, the top 1%, indeed. But I need to get Tunde's kind of defense for this. I mean, how does the government defend itself in that respect when you're buying new airplanes and yachts for the leaders, while the average civil servant working for the government in Nigeria makes what, $67 a month? I mean, he was talking about $30 a month for the average worker. It's $67 for someone working underneath the top government officials. Where's the disconnect here?
I do not think that you need to compare the wages in Nigeria to the wages in the US or in the UK, because they are
even so, still $67 a month anywhere on the planet is pretty abysmal for a civil servant.
You look at the president. The president has just approved that minimum wage with over 100%. And you look at it, is it sustainable? Because the major sector that creates jobs are the private sector. So if you don't have more private sector and you have people relying on government job and all of that, how many Nigerians we have? Over 200 million Nigerians. If 80% of the employable population is employed by government, how do you think the government will succeed? So the best thing the government was doing is to empower the private sector, putting up initiative there to empower the private sector. Like my colleague discussant was saying in Jaws, a good week. You're talking about no employment, no job. This government since inception has been putting up initiative for the youth of Nigeria to be employable. Look at the skill Hub Artisan program. Look at the digital and creative enterprise program. Look at the National Youth Academy being created. Look at the National Youth Talent Export program. That all of these things are towards making Nigerian youth employable. And all of these things, you can assess all of this so that if you have a good training, you can become an entrepreneur and you can become an employer of labor. That is what the government is doing. The government is trying to create an environment where you will be able to be an employer of labor and help Nigerians to grow. And at the same token, yes,
Okay.
there's no way about the minimum wage. What we're talking about, the minimum wage, $30. You have to look at the repercussions or the after effect of these wages when you are fixing them, because you are not fixing these wages alone for those that are working in government, but you are fixing the wages for across board, both public and private sector. Also, look at the government initiative in terms of the autonomy granted the local government. This has been lacking in Nigeria, and this has been
Okay, the clock is against us, unfortunately. So let me just check back with Tony quickly and ask you, Tony, what you make of the defense you just heard. Is it good enough? Is it perhaps just a matter of time before these projects really kick in, these initiatives by the government kick in, and people will see the results? They've only been in power 15 months, as mentioned. So is there something that will get better, perhaps?
Well, you see, it's very, very simple. And why do I say it's very, very simple? Yes, the government is trying to put this in place and put that policy in place, to help the youths to be gainfully employed or to even become employers of labor. But so far, the question is, has all of these things that have been promised to us, to the Nigerian youth, are we seeing the dividends? Are we beginning to enjoy the dividends? Or are we just talking about promises? Are we just talking about things that will become and have not been? If things are good, if things are favorable for the average Nigerian youth today, I don't think that you would have seen the protest that we saw. It's different to just be up there and then you're talking about this initiative, to empower youths and all of that. Go down to the grassroots and see how many youths are benefiting from all of this initiative. It is at the grassroots that you know what is really happening in Nigeria. And so far in the grassroots, all you will see, like I have said before, is number one, you will see abject poverty. We have been poor in Nigeria before, but the poverty in Nigeria right now is something that it's terrible. It's just bad, and that is what we're talking about here. It's not just about saying, okay, we have this policy. How has this policy gone down to the very grassroots to help the average Nigerian youth?
You're saying it's not translating to the people.
It's not translating to the people at all.
And I know perhaps, Tunde, you can argue that it's a matter of time for these initiatives to really set in and take hold. But unfortunately, the Nigerian economy has really underperformed tremendously in the last few years, and it's not getting back on track. But I need to come back to Omoyele, because there's another issue here among these protesters that, especially for an international audience, it's something that was noticed and made note of over and over again. When we see the protesters out on the streets, and this has fueled the government ministers who are saying that these protests have been infiltrated by outside forces and by other political players, we're seeing Russian flags among certain protesters. And we even saw tailors who made those Russian flags actually arrested. So what is happening? Where are these other elements coming in from foreign countries, and why?
Well, you must understand the context in which people were displaying Russian flags. And every protest in the history of mankind comes with its signals, symbols, logos, battle cries. And it's been said, even by the protesters themselves, that they have seen that Nigeria doesn't give them hope anymore. As a result, they're using the Russian flags displayed as their own way of protesting against the failure of their own nation to support them. And the reason is that you have to look at the proximity of countries that had military rule in recent times, where Russia was believed to be behind those military takeovers. It engineered people to feel like, well, maybe if we sit down to Nigeria and Russia, the government will understand that we have lost faith in them. This is a vote of no confidence passed on the Nigerian system. And we've also discovered that the military might be, involved in that, and we've condemned it. We do not believe in military rule, and we are not doing this for military power. But let's be very clear that so many of these tactics that you're seeing were also introduced by the government. They claim that the guy was arrested for making the flags. When it was investigated, it was discovered the guy doesn't even know how to use a sewing machine. So how did he make the flag? So government in Nigeria is very vast in lying.
But you're basically saying, though, that if anything, it's just symbolic. It's just symbolic. It doesn't have this deeper meaning that they're actually inviting Russian troops in. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I need to give Tunde one final minute to respond to that, though. So sorry. Tunde, go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, I believe it is not acceptable for a protester for protestants to display another foreign flag in Nigeria, because it tampers with the sovereignty of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So therefore, I'm not in support of such a presentation that is a show of displaying their losing hope on that government. Which government are you losing hope? The worst of a democratic government is better than the best of military rule. Omoyele will testify to that. You know, having fought in them school days, to know that yes, we have a government that we can talk, a government that we can protest, not a government that if we go out to protest, they will guard us or kill us immediately. But this is a democratic government where we have freedom of speech, freedom of everything. And let me before I go, let me let my brother there note that look, the government we have is giving power to the people in the grassroots. When we were growing up in Nigeria, we know the local government to provide us everything, not what we have now that everybody is reliant on the federal government. There's a Tunde, of government,
unfortunately,
the and the local, and the power has been given to the local government. It's just for us now to make sure that we support
we are
the local
over
government.
Time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'm really going to have to just cut it there, and I apologize for that.
Nigeria, they use computer. The leaders of Nigeria, they use radio where they turn the knob.